Now we're going to turn our attention to the very first of our three pillars, and this is about how you strengthen institutions, and we're asking, is there a right or a wrong way of doing it? The panel will be led by Kanika Chawla, who's the Director at Sustainable Energy for All, and in a moment she'll introduce her panelists and they'll have that conversation. Do enjoy it.
Trusted legal and regulatory frameworks are the bedrock of resilient communities. Strengthening institutional capacity puts individuals, companies, and nations on firm ground to fulfill their potential. A respected rule of law provides confidence, so vital for attracting and assuring investors and boosting capital flows. Our policy-based loans are driving green growth across Bangladesh and Botswana, re-energizing the economies while mobilizing local and international investors, supporting national climate and sustainable development policies in Panama and Paraguay, promoting financial and digital transformation in Morocco, supporting reform as well as microfinance and microinsurance. By working together for a common purpose, we're building a more equitable and resilient world.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sure that we have your full attention after that very inspiring morning, where we have seen so many testaments of leadership in many, many different ways. But in reality, I think the thing that really stuck out for me was the leadership of the OPEC Fund in accelerating its commitment towards development support. And what is really critical in driving resilient progress and irreversible change in countries is the readiness of countries to use this development assistance in ways that actually boosts local economies, that provides progress and prosperity for local communities, and really is, in many ways, as President Bio said, has the institutions that can be the bedrock of nation building. So it is my great pleasure and honor today to be joined by this very illustrious panel that know all about the complexities of building institutions that can power the progress of economies as well as of local communities. And so please welcome me in joining this great panel. I'm going to do very brief introductions, but you have longer introductions in the booklet, and this is only because I want to take all of the time that I have with these great, illustrious panelists to hear from them rather than in laying out all of their great past experience. But please, maybe if I can just go from starting with you. So Serge Ekue is the president of the West African Development Bank. Next to him, we have Minister Shehan Semasinghe, who is the State Minister of Finance for Sri Lanka. Next to him, we have Minister Zeina Toukan, who's the Minister for Planning and International Cooperation from Jordan. And next to her, we have the Cabinet Secretary Ndung'u, who's of National Treasury and Economic Planning in Kenya. And then, of course, we have Mr. Enrique Garcia, Chairman of the Trust for the Americas and former President of the Development Bank of Latin America. And so maybe if I can start with you, we know that it is institutions that really translate intention into action, that drive progress. And so, Mr. Garcia, to start from you, from your experience, what do you think are some of the elements that need to come together to drive this kind of progress?
Well, thank you very much. Well, very short, as you told me, 2 seconds. I think crucial elements. First, a long-term vision, which has to be holistic. Because sometimes what I found out, people talk about sustainable development. People on the environment concentrate on that. Others on the social sector concentrate on that. No, you have to have the 4 E's. Macroeconomic efficiency, stability, point number 1. Economic efficiency, productivity, competitiveness, but that's not sufficient. Then equity and social inclusion and environmental stability, that's crucial. So to do that, what do you need? You need leadership, you need organization, separation of powers if it's a country, very clear organization, and the main thing, structure, an organization that reflects the new trends in technology and not to work as you were in the past. And finally, the most important, human capital. So what is the way that an institution selects the staff? How competitive, how professional? Is political influence the main topic? No, it shouldn't be. It should be professionalism. And how you promote people. And of course, values and ethical principles. So in essence, that. It's easy to say that, but it's difficult. It's very complicated, especially, and I make a difference, of course. One thing is if you are dealing with a country, another thing is you are dealing with the institution. But the principle of holistic vision and defined programs, projects, following up all the steps necessary. Don't jump. Sometimes you say environment, oh, it'll come later. No. Well, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for that. Minister Semasinghe, if I can turn to you, especially because Sri Lanka has recently navigated quite complex and turbulent waters, what has been the role of institutions in maintaining and restoring stability?
Thank you. As you all know, Sri Lanka is emerging from the worst economic crisis we have faced post-independence. And we wish to thank all our partners for supporting Sri Lanka. In navigating through this turbulent period, there were new legislations that were introduced which did not exist in the past in Sri Lanka. So these were basically identified as good practices, and I think we were quite late in implementing these reforms. So if I mention a few of the reforms, one was the new Central Bank Act, basically which gives an autonomous body to give an autonomous body to the central bank, and also this changed the act which was in existence in Sri Lanka. So there won't be any interference to the controlling of the monetary policy, and the central bank has the full independence in taking their decisions with regards to price stability in Sri Lanka. Secondly, we also saw many speakers talk about poverty. How do you eradicate poverty in Sri Lanka? In Sri Lanka, we had many institutions which existed, but if you see the welfare benefits were never properly targeted. So in this sense, we introduced a new act which basically reinstated the new welfare benefit board in Sri Lanka, which will now execute more targeted social safety net in Sri Lanka, and we have strengthened the social safety net. Recently, the Parliament passed the new Public Debt Management Office legislation, and I think this was a timely requirement because we were already in debt distress. The other significant legislation or the institution that we are looking at is the new Economic Commission. Under the Economic Transformation Bill, which is being introduced to Parliament, and we trust we can debate it by mid-July and pass that in Parliament. So this will basically create a couple of new institutions and agencies This will carry forward confidence to enhance investment zones in Sri Lanka and to strengthen international trade. One of the most important aspect of the new reform agenda, I would say, strengthening of the new authority on the Commission on Bribery and Corruption. So this was spoken for a long time in Sri Lanka, but unfortunately no government, until the crisis happened, tried to strengthen this area. So this was one of the key institutions that we are looking at. So this new institution, which was established under the Anti-Corruption Act number 2023, has the objective of eradicating bribery and corruption in Sri Lanka. So this could lead into a major transformation in Sri Lanka, which every citizen in Sri Lanka expected. So these are few new institution frameworks that were introduced post-crisis. And also we were assisted by the IMF and the other multilateral agencies, as well as our bilateral partners. So I think we have a good way forward, and we have introduced these good practices in Sri Lanka.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for your candor in recognizing the need for new institutional capacity and in addressing unprecedented challenges as well. But, you know, we were also hearing about this earlier, that crisis in one country has knock-on effects, and it affects the region and beyond. And in Jordan, Minister Toukan, this is something that is a challenge that Jordan has been facing because of the upheaval in the region. How have you been able to both introduce and maintain the institutional resilience as the region itself has continued to face some turbulence?
Thank you, Kanika. It has not been an easy process at all. Especially with the heightened geopolitical situation. Jordan continues to bear the heavy cost and burdens of a refugee community. And also, as a small economy, the repercussions of the global crisis has had a toll on Jordan. The pandemic, the repercussions of the Russia-Ukraine, inflationary pressure, stagflation, but also climate change, where when it comes to climate change, it's a painful reality in Jordan, especially manifested in the water sector. How did we manage to maintain resilience and stay the course? We've heavily invested in the reform process. A long-term reform process. The political will is there, the vision is there, and continuously building the capacities and working with the various development partners to ensure that the system continues or is able to deliver. What we did also is our program is homegrown, so we own the program, and this is what helps us to ensure continuity across the governments. And it was done in a manner, and continues to be done in a sequenced, phased approach, which has helped us to navigate through a lot of, in the face of the crisis that we've been facing. We did not take the successive shocks to slow down the process. On the contrary, expediting execution and front-loading some of the critical reforms. We have taken difficult decisions at very difficult times, be it at the level of macro fiscal stability, energy, water, subsidies, good governance, reforms, among others. Our program, because it has been is a homegrown reform, it has been also the anchor of our programs with various international financing institutions like the IMF. And other development partners. With the IMF, we successfully concluded a 4-year program that has been noted as a model program by the fund, and we opted willingly to continue with the fund to ensure that the momentum continues. This has been, the reform momentum has also been recognized by credit rating agencies, where at some regional and global downgrades that has happened over the past year or for the past couple of years, We maintained the credit rating with positive outlooks, but recently we were also upgraded, the credit rating by Moody's. Jordan was upgraded. We focused on pre-actions rather than reactions. This has helped us navigate some of the challenges through the pandemic and also the repercussions, Russia-Ukraine, and I will give an example like the wheat and investing in social safety net, which just has helped us in timely and temporary interventions. Setting the vision forward, we launched an economic modernization vision, a 10-year vision in 2022 to ensure that the momentum continues. But it's a parallel to a political process, but also administrative process. In terms of delivery, we moved institutional delivery. We moved on two-step approach. At the vision, a Prime Minister delivery unit has been institutionalized, and there has been in function for the past 2 years with a public dashboard on progress implementation when it comes to the vision, where ministers are being held accountable, but also a reform secretariat at the Ministry of Planning to oversee, coordinate, and provide the technical expertise that are needed for reform implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Actually, I think that there's two really critical things that you've said in there. One, about it being a homegrown process and really being fit for purpose. And I think it's really important to recognize that governance and policy and regulation will require to be tailored to the very specific requirements of individual countries, but also the monitoring element of it. And I think that, Minister Semasinghe, you were also talking about this, is that there need to be independent, autonomous organizations that make sure that intention is being translated into action and that process is thorough, is seamless, is continuous. And so with that, okay, if I can turn to you, I think you have a very unique vantage point, because while you are a partner in this shared mission and of institutional capacity building and enabling that in countries, there is also, as a financial institution, and with that lens of what are the signals that countries can send to show their readiness to absorb capital, let's say. And so what do you think are some of the critical gaps and some suggestions perhaps just to plug those?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. But before I do answer, I'd like, first of all, to thank the President and Chairman of the OPEC Fund, my good friend, Abdulhamid Al-Khalifa. When we first met 3.5 years back, we started discussing, and we discussed just like if we've been friends for decades, which literally means that when we share the same vision about development, when we share the same vision about the way we should manage our institutions, it makes the whole different, and it eases the cooperation. And as this forum is fully dedicated to cooperation, I have to say that, just like when we say in London, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. All right, so I think we've been eating the same pudding together, and our cooperation is, I think, a major one. And I have to say, I'm delighted again of the way we've been cooperating together. Again, thank you very much for this. Now, coming back to your very question. Well, the West African Development Bank is the development institution of 8 countries in West Africa. And as you're well aware, we face with critical situations, starting with instability, with the floods, we have faced difficult situation with COVID, etc., etc. But again, we are the institution, the development institution for 8 countries, gathering more than 150 million inhabitants. The growth of our population is above 8%. And again, this literally means that in a generation time, we will be as populated as the US. So you can imagine the challenges we have in front of us when it comes to agriculture, infrastructure, energy, housing, social housing, health and education. We have discussed this morning about education. Naturally, education is a key element for us. Now, as a financial institution, the financial arm of our institution, we know that everything we have to do has to have real impact. It's a question of speed. We have to do things fast, but to increase our speed. Now, first thing first, we have started with a vision. What is the vision? The vision is how to enhance the development of our countries. That is the vision. And how do we do that? We have started with this question of our capital, the Tier 1 capital. Obviously, our institutions were way undercapitalized, way undercapitalized. Capital has led to capitalism. And capitalism was the essence of the development of all the countries in the world. So we have started with it, working hard to increase our Tier 1 capital, to strengthen our capital structure. Now, this is ongoing, but is the key, because the question of the quantum, how much funding do we need, it's key. So the question is less to get access to funding, to get access to the debt market. BOAD has been tapping the debt market since 2015. So debt is not the issue. The real issue, the number one issue, is capital, so that based on the leverage ratio, we can tap the debt market under conditions that are compatible with our development, which are maturity, because there is no way you can set up, build, construct an energy plant in 3, 4, 5 years. Impossible. Unless you require returns above 15%, which is incompatible with our development. Then, and I'll end up with this, once we have done with the question of the maturity, then the question of the concessionality, the level of interest rates. 15% interest, 10% interest is incompatible. So we've been working on the quantum, we've been working on the method, which is something we have taken from the private sector, originate to distribute, how to work with partnerships, private sector, work with funds, private funds, infra funds, climate funds. This is where we are, and we rely very much naturally on our capital, our capacity building, enhancing our human capital capacities.
Thank you so much for that. And I think these are really interesting points that I would like to bring to you, Cabinet Secretary Ndung'u, especially because you have also been a central banker in the past. And so to really think about what are the signals that work in attracting capital, especially under the leadership that Kenya has already demonstrated. I think it would be really good to understand from your point of view, what were some of the key signals that markets have responded to in a way that has actually driven development, not just the flow of capital, but actually given progress and development?
Thank you very much indeed. But let me start by thanking the president of the OPEC Fund for inviting me. And he had also invited the president of the Republic of Kenya. But unfortunately, as of yesterday, I think things are not very stable in the country. So it was decided that I come and represent him, his apologies. But because essentially the issues that we are talking about are actually very related to some of those issues that we see in the development discourse. But let me go back a little bit to the basics. It's good always to understand the basics. When we talk about institutions, we have to ask ourselves, what is the basic tenets of institutions? How can we define the role of institutions? I was a regulator one time, and I used to say that regulatory institutions must be very, very critical. And it's perhaps a general structure of that. I have two important characteristics or functions of the institutions. And one of them is actually to uphold the legal framework, the rules of the game. And that for us is very, very important. The moment you don't follow the rules of the game, then there will be no game. And the second one is to define the appropriate incentives. That is the reward structure. And we know that a combination of the rules of the game or the legal framework and incentive and appropriate incentives is just going to encourage prudent behavior in the marketplace. And not just in the marketplace, every other place, every other things that we are doing. And that is how we can unleash our own potential. In fact, when I'm looking at the theme of this conference, of this forum, driving resilience and equity, it's actually to say what will be the role of institutions. Let me give 3 or 4 examples. First, this morning we started by hearing about human capital development. I like connecting education, health, labor markets, and nutrition in that bucket of human capital development. And you can see from wherever you start, you can show why human capital development has failed in most countries, especially in the South, in African countries, because we don't connect that very well. Even the theme of the World Bank report 2024 is actually based on the stagnation of the middle-income countries. And again, you'll map it into institutions. The second one, which I like most, is because we are here with OPEC, is actually markets. Why markets fail is because institutions have failed. Or let me be bold enough and say, when institutions fail, policy must of necessity fail. And one of the critical areas here we've talked about is markets. Markets will fail because we do not observe the rules of the game. Markets will fail because we don't define the appropriate incentives. When we look at markets, for example, OPEC is a market. It has sustained itself since the 1970s. Why? Is because we have followed the appropriate legal framework and the incentives that are required. And the third point I wanted to add is human capital development. And not human capital development, domestic resource mobilization, which becomes very important for us because if you combine those 3 examples, you'll exactly see where the role of institutions have come in. So the bold point is this. We cannot redefine our development goals when we do not uphold the DNA of institutions as I define them. And this is where we want to draw examples. That's where we want to connect the dots. And once we connect the dots, we can define the appropriate framework for sustainable development. Let me stop there because there are so many examples to connect the dots. Thank you.
But thank you for that. I think examples are really critical in seeing how the motivation to have sustained change can actually be implemented. And I think this is, we don't have very much time left. So what I would like to do is a little bit of a lightning round, if I may, to come to each of you for very specific examples of sustained change. So you may have set out with a certain intention, but then there's also an iterative process of making, some changes or corrections or additions so that there cannot be backsliding. And we see this all the time in the world of energy and climate where we have announcements and then we have backsliding. And this is exactly to your point, CS. It's because it wasn't enshrined in law and then was not being upheld by an institution. It was just an announcement, right? So how do we create an ecosystem that actually supports the leadership as well as the commitments that are being made by countries? So Minister Toukan, if I can start with you, because you have, there's so many examples and you were touching on them in your first response, but let's just use the refugee crisis in the region and how the response from your country has led to sustained change.
Kanika, to put things into perspective, about 1/3 of Jordan's 11 million population are registered refugees, either with the UNRWA or with the UNHCR, of which 1.37 million are Syrian refugees. Since the outset of the Syrian refugee crisis, we tried to set a regional and a global model in terms of dealing with the refugee crisis. And because of the protracted nature of the crisis, we had to evolve in our response. We started with a humanitarian emergency response, focusing mainly on food, shelter, and basic needs. But with time and due to the prolonged nature of the crisis, we had to evolve to a more resilience-based system based on which the Jordan Response Plan was launched. It's a plan that was done and prepared in a collaborative process. So we had to engage with our development partners, the donors, UN agencies, implementing partners from international, local NGOs, but also from the private sector, to identify the needs to help us in our resilience-based response and approach, especially that the majority, 90% of the refugees live in host communities. So this was for us was very important. What helped us also that we institutionalized and created a dedicated unit to oversee, coordinate and manage the process, but also put the governance structure in place from the government end at the ministerial level, but also at the sectoral working groups to identify the needs, but also an interagency coordination committee that has been meeting weekly since 2015 when the first JRP was launched. The plan was supposed to be a 3-year plan, but it became a rolling plan because it's still a reality with us today. And coupled with that, an online platform was also launched to ensure that there's transparency, expedite approval process, tracking, due diligence, and so on. In 2016, to complement this, we launched what in a more holistic approach effort, which is known as the Jordan Compact. Taking the humanitarian and resilience approach towards more longer-term approach, looking at the refugees as productive resources rather than just refugees, and taking some policy measures on the education, the expansion that took place there on technical, vocational skilling side, but also on the livelihood, access to work permits free of charge, flexible, especially in the sectors that are occupied by foreign labor, but also home-based businesses. In a nutshell, the success has been a burden sharing, which is a collaborative partnership, has helped us strengthen resilience, but also the Jordan Response Plan became a national plan when dealing with the refugee crisis. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think it's really interesting to draw perhaps a contrast between a very human-centered planning process with a large infrastructure project. And so, Mr. Garcia, in the lightning round, if I can turn to you for a quick response, is what kind of institutional support is required for large infrastructure projects?
Well, I think institutions are crucial. And let me be practical and give you an example. As former president of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, for 26 years, and one of the leading development bank in Latin America in infrastructure. One example that I want to highlight is the expansion of the Panama Canal. In the 2006, the president of Panama and some private bankers were offering him the financing. I went to see him and convince him that the nature of this project, close to $6 billion, required the work of the multilaterals. And I made a bet. I said, I'm going to help to organize that we work together. And we did it. And why was it possible? First, because the Panamanians follow the rules of the game. In other words, you had good and independent pre-feasibility and feasibility studies and design studies. You cover technical, economic, financial, social, and environmental issues. The issue, as one of the members said, was financing. How you finance that? So we worked together with the World Bank, IFC, Inter-American Development Bank, JBIC, European Investment Bank, and several private banks, and of course, facilitated AB loans with commercial banks. And the project was completed, and it's a successful story. What does it show? It shows that the requirement is that you have a good planning process in projects, especially infrastructure. sometimes in discussions with heads of state or ministers, like many of you, when we used to go, they say, well, but multilaterals take too long. They are asking, well, I say, where are your studies? Well, later on we'll have the environmental impact. No, you have to do that at the early stage. In the pre-feasibility stage, you have to cover the social environment. Then you go to the details. And the devil is in the details, and the detail is the financing. And there was a story, and we can have many more. And I take the opportunity to invite the OPEC fund to work together with institutions in Latin America, in particular with CAF Development Bank of Latin America, which I'm not the president, I'm former, but I was there 26 years and 18 years in the Inter-American Development Bank. So, hope.
Thank you for that. Now, I think this is a really important point. And I mean, as a development bank, Mr. Ekue, what are some of the institutional strengths that development banks need to have internally to be able to do this effectively, to be able to deliver on their mission, let's say, but in a really effective way?
Development bank would rely on naturally their human capital, which is the essence of things, their capacity to modernize their own organization when it comes to market access, when it comes to fund mobilization, but also when it comes to balance sheet optimization. All this is very modern. In a nutshell, a development institution have now, and the time is right for that, to apply private sector's method so as to be very efficient. And we need to move from a culture of underwriting to a culture of impact. If we can't change people's life, we're worthless. If we can't, when it comes to projects, evaluate the job content, we're pointless.
Exactly. I think this is a really, really good point. I mean, for a country like Kenya, where you have a Vision 2030 that says issue-based, people-centered, and result-oriented, how are these three things coming together? Can you give us a really quick example, CS?
Thank you very much indeed. And that is, you mentioned Vision 2030, and then the new administration started off with bottom-up economic transformation agenda. The bottom line is that you recognize that the majority of the people have been left behind. How do you lift them? You have to come up with projects. We have to come up with policy reforms, projects, and interventions that actually reach them. Then that is what is really happening. That is going to create the signaling that is required. Coming back to the point about, for example, the examples he has given, you have also to recognize that you have to ignite growth for you to start looking at debt financing projects that are going to be financed by projects. What the government has done is actually create 5 sectors that can create the momentum for growth, and that can set up the signaling that you require. One of the recognitions that we see is that the real growth is very, very important for giving the right signals in terms of the debt carrying capacity. Because you've accumulated debt, which is beyond the real growth of the economy, then you ignite some challenges in terms of solvency. And that is where we are. So the signaling that we are seeing is that economic recovery has started from Vision 2030 to actually the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, and actually coming up with value chain that combines or just shows how you can connect the industrial policy and agricultural policy to achieve this. And that is the signaling that we are actually focusing on.
Thank you. And I know we're out of time, so Minister Semasinghe, I'm going to give you the last word for what you are taking away from this panel.
Well, let me thank the OPEC Fund for assisting Sri Lanka at the most difficult timings. And we will need some more support and strengthened support from your end. As you know, Sri Lanka is going through a debt restructuring process. So as a result, most of the foreign financed projects are on temporary hold. So we expect to finalize our debt resolutions as early as possible, and that will give space for Sri Lankan government to facilitate and build adequate infrastructure development for adequate infrastructure development for economic activities to flow. Secondly, with the past experience, we are shifting our economy towards digital transformation. So this is one of the key prioritized areas the government is keen on. And as a result, already we have started few main projects like introducing a national digital payment platform for all the procurement systems, which will be done electronically. And we are also establishing a trusted, unique, secured and accurate digital identity system, which will have all biometrics of anybody above 15 years old. And today we are also starting a exhibition on DigiEcon. It's called DigiEcon, the international conference and exhibitions. The objective is to showcase innovative IT-related products and services which Sri Lanka offers. So this will be a key initiative which will commence today. So finally, if I say we face the crisis, we have rectified the mistakes. We have gone along with all the development partners and the MDBs. Secondly, we have introduced reforms that are, again, I would say good practices, which should have been done about 20 years back. And now, as a country, we are in the right economic path. Exactly. And we are very confident of Sri Lanka bouncing back very strongly. So for that, we need to align with our partners closely, associate partners closely, and ensure we share experiences, our own experience as well as the others' experience, to ensure that the entire world does not go back to a similar crisis what we experienced.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Minister. And I think what we've learned today really is institutional strength is a truism. I mean, we all have agreed. I don't think anybody in this room would dispute that. But thank you very much to each of you for sharing your stories, as well as some of the cutting-edge levers that we have that can help accelerate the strengthening of institutions. So with that, please join me in thanking this fantastic panel.